Today we're looking at 5 essential tactics and tips to help you in the IELTS test. For many years I was an IELTS examiner, and these are the tips and tactics I wish I could have shared with the students that I was examining. If you're new here, my name is Eli and I'm an ex-IELTS examiner. I now put all of my best tips and advice in my website englishprotips.com. I've already helped thousands of students get their desired IELTS score, and hopefully you'll be next. Okay, on with the lesson. Tip number 1 is to learn 5 different ways to express your opinion. Now, the IELTS test is full of questions asking about your beliefs. Questions like these. So you might get a question like, do you think people spend too much time on social media these days? Or a writing question like, it is often said that sports stars and entertainers are paid too much money. To what extent do you agree or disagree? So my advice is to learn different ways to express your opinion in speaking and in writing, and to use these phrases a lot before your IELTS test. So let's look at some right now. For speaking, I'd recommend these 5. I think that. That's the most basic. I think that. I think that sports stars and entertainers are often paid too much money. I believe, or I believe that. I believe that the majority of entertainers don't make enough money. I reckon that. I reckon that the top 1% of sports stars earn the majority of the money available. I'd say that. So this is my personal favorite. I often say I'd say that. I'd say that is I would say that. So I'd say that sports stars are often paid too much money. I'm not entirely sure, but this is a great phrase. When you get asked a question that you've never considered before, you can say, I'm not entirely sure, but. I'm not entirely sure how much sports stars are paid, but I imagine it's a lot of money. Great. So what about writing then? Okay, here's 5 that I would recommend that you learn and then use in your practice essays. My favorite is this. I would argue that. I would argue that sports stars are paid too much money. I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that the top 2% of sports stars earn the majority of the income. I strongly agree. I strongly agree that the income earned by sports stars should be more evenly distributed. Okay, here's a really good advanced one. While I acknowledge that, I would say that. While I acknowledge that some sports stars and entertainers earn a colossal amount of money, I would say that the majority of sports stars and entertainers are struggling to make ends meet. So they're struggling to make enough money. Although it is true that, I would argue that. Although it is true that some sports stars earn a huge amount of money, I would argue that many sports stars are finding it difficult to make a living in this profession. So, what I would recommend is to take all of these ways to express your opinion and to practice them and work out which ones are useful for you in the speaking and the writing test. And the idea is you use them and you combine them. Okay, tip number 2, learn to speak at length without repetition. Okay, so when the examiner is assessing you, they're looking at something like this. These are the public band descriptors. Now you'll see here, able to keep going and readily produce long turns without noticeable effort. So the examiner needs to see that you can speak at length on any of the topics and any of the questions they ask you about without too much hesitation, repetition, self-correction, or just stopping. This is a difficult thing to do. If you've ever tried to do a Part 2 IELTS test, you know it's difficult to speak at length, especially when you're trying to avoid repeating yourself. So something to definitely practice. And by the way, repetition is something examiners are really looking out for. If we look at band 7, it says some hesitation and some repetition. If we look at band 8, occasional repetition, so less than some. And if we look at band 9, it says only very occasional repetition. So if the examiner sees that you're repeating words or phrases or ideas too often, you're going to get a lower score. So how do we learn to give long turns without repeating ourselves? Well, here's my advice to you. Tell stories. Especially in part 1 and part 2 of the speaking test, you can tell stories, and by telling stories, you're going to naturally have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you're going to reduce your chances of repeating yourself. So here's some advice, particularly for part 2. In part 2, the examiner gives you 1 minute to prepare on a topic, and you need to speak for 2 minutes. My advice is to continue speaking until the examiner asks you to stop. Now, if you run out of things to say, I would say to start talking about the future. For example, you can say, in the future, I would like to. For example, in part 2, if you have to describe a special holiday and you've already talked about every aspect of the holiday, you've already told your story and you've run out of things to say, you can say, in the future, I would really like to go on holiday to this destination again. Or in the future, I would like to go to a different place. There's so many more things you can talk about when you're talking about the future. Now, throughout the IELTS test, don't worry if the examiner interrupts you. Remember, they've only got between 11 and 14 minutes, and they've got all of these questions that they need to ask you. So it's very common that the examiner will ask you to stop and move you on to the next question. That's not the examiner being rude, it's just that they have to do that to get through all their questions. By the way, if you want to practice this, so speaking at length without repetition and without self-correction and without hesitation, I'd recommend that you just take your mobile phone and record yourself and then listen to how often you repeat yourself, you hesitate and you self-correct, and try and reduce it. You can always record the same topic or the same question again and again. Number 3, use examples in your speaking and writing. Examples are key. So, do you think that children should wear a school uniform? Yes, I do. If students don't have a school uniform, then they can get picked on for the clothes they wear. Okay, this is a fine answer. However, we can improve it just by giving an example. For example, in my school, we didn't have a school uniform and certain students were teased because they didn't have brand name clothes. So we're going from like a band 7 to a band 9 answer just by using these kind of examples. That's not always the case, but certainly using examples will boost your score. So think about examples from your own experience, from things that happen in your country, from your family, from people you know. Use examples to develop your ideas. Now, this is especially important in IELTS writing. If we go back to the band descriptors, this is the writing band descriptors, we're going to see this. At band 9, it says ideas are relevant, fully extended and well supported. At 8, we have ideas are relevant and extended and supported. And at 7, we have main ideas are extended and supported. So you can see that extending and supporting your ideas is super important for IELTS writing. And the best way to do that is to use examples. Okay, number 4, learn 10 linking words and use them in your essays. So linking words are words that connect sentences or are within sentences connecting ideas. So when we're writing our IELTS essays, we're going to be using linking words to give our opinion, to introduce ideas, to introduce contrasting ideas, to give a consequence, and to give an example. There are other uses for linking words, but these are the main ones in our IELTS essays. So I would recommend that you learn 2 linking words for each of these uses and then to use them regularly in your practice essays before you go to do your real IELTS test. So I'm going to give you some now. For giving opinions, I would say, I would argue that, or some people believe that, or you can use all of the others that we looked at the beginning of this lesson. For introducing ideas, you can say, there are 2 reasons, firstly. So there are two reasons why I think sports stars are paid too much money. Firstly, So by using these linking words, we're going to get a much higher score in our IELTS writing. We can also use the linking word in addition to introduce a second idea. Now, we're often introducing contrasting ideas, and there's two linking phrases that I think are very useful for this. The first is however. So some people believe that sports stars aren't paid enough money. However, I would argue that they are paid too much money. So that however is really useful. The other one is nevertheless, and you use it very similarly to however. So some people think that sports stars are paid too much money. Nevertheless, I would argue that the majority of sports stars don't earn enough to continue their sport. To give a consequence, I would recommend as a result, and this means that. And to give an example, you can use for example, that's obvious. However, I would also recommend that you use for instance. So just by using these 10 linking words, we're showing the examiner that we've got a range of linking words, which is what they're looking for to be giving you those band 7, 8, and 9 scores. Tip number 5, the ultimate tip. Say it depends and then elaborate. So there are so many questions in the IELTS test like, do you think that expensive clothes are better than cheap clothes? Do you think it's better to travel when you are younger or older? In your opinion, is it good for countries to host major international sporting events? Well, the answer is, it depends. It's always it depends. So let's think about how we can use it depends to boost our speaking. Do you think expensive clothes are better than cheap clothes? I think it depends on why those clothes are more expensive. If they are more expensive because they have a better fit and are made of higher quality material, then yeah, I guess they are better. However, if they are simply more expensive because they have a cool logo, then I don't think they are necessarily better. So great. The idea is we say it depends and then we elaborate. Let's look at another question. Do you think it's better to travel when you are younger or older? Well, I think it depends on your personality and priorities. If you are someone that wants to focus on your career, then it's probably better to travel later in life. However, if you are someone that wants to travel extensively and have lots of new experiences, then probably traveling when you are younger is better. In your opinion, is it good for countries to host major international sporting events? This is a real question from a very difficult Part 3 IELTS test. So you can say that. You can say, oof, tough question. I think it really depends on whether the country has the infrastructure to host such events. If the country in question already has stadiums, an abundance of hotels to cater to the influx of spectators, then it can be beneficial. However, if the infrastructure isn't already in place, such an event can put a lot of strain on a country. Okay, we have covered so much ground in one video. This is like, 5+ years of examining and then 10+ years of teaching boiled down into 5 simple tips and tactics. And to be honest, I'm really happy to be sharing these tips and tactics because it's something that I've just thought about for such a long period of time. So anyway, thank you very much for being part of this lesson. I really hope these tips and tactics that can basically help you to get the score that you need. Remember, you can check out EnglishProTips.com. I've got full courses on the writing, the listening, the reading, the speaking. I've even got a vocabulary course. And certainly the premium members of my courses really get super high scores. And I'm really proud of the courses and the students of my website. So big thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye.